Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast is listener-supported independent media. Please pitch in if you can at patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/aroundtheempire. Today, our guest is Aaron Maté, and we talk about the latest quote-unquote bombshell story that revealed that the identity and the location of a Kremlin spy, Oleg Smolenkov, and claimed that he provided intelligence proving that Vladimir Putin ordered an election influence operation favoring Donald Trump. We also discussed the machinations of former CIA Director John Brennan, also the Barr and Durham investigation of the investigators, and the political ramifications of Russiagate overall. Aaron Maté is the host of the Pushback with Aaron Maté show at the Gray Zone and a contributing writer at The Nation. We recorded this on September 15th, 2019. Aaron Maté joins us today. Hey, Aaron, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Joanne.
So let's talk about the state of affairs with the Russiagate scandal and zero in on the latest quote-unquote bombshell, Kremlin spy story, and sort of what it kind of tells us about the state of affairs, because I think it does give us some information and kind of other clues about the origins of the Trump-Russia investigations and possibly about what's going on behind the scenes right now in the current investigate the investigators process. So first, maybe we should just quickly do the timeline of the reporting on this. It was pretty strange. Suddenly the story broke almost like just in time for Rachel Maddow's show or something. I don't know what, but you want to go through that real quick about how it played out that night?
Well, I think the key thing here is that basically in advance of this story getting out, because multiple outlets looks like they had it, CNN got it first, and they tried to, they came out with a story that basically spun it in a way that where the blame here was on Donald Trump, that the reason why this Kremlin mole was exfiltrated from Russia was out of concerns that President Trump would reveal classified intelligence. And the reason we were given for that is because he supposedly told Russian visitors in the Oval Office in the spring of 2017 some sensitive information. Now, there's a few things there. First of all, on the face of it, that explanation just seemed ludicrous because the supposed classified information that Trump revealed to Russian visitors was not very sensitive. Most of it by that point was already publicly known. It had to do with some what intelligence officials believed was going to be an ISIS method of attacking the U.S. via laptops on airplanes. That was already known. There was only one thing that might not have been known that Trump divulged, which is where it came from, which is Israel. But regardless, it's, the idea that this was sensitive intelligence was just laughable on its face. And yeah, later on in the day, the Times came out with reports. The Times and the Washington Post came out with reports that painted a picture of this informant, in fact, being exfiltrated from Russia, not due to Trump and concerns about Trump, but because of media leaks that made it pretty much impossible for him to stay. The first attempt to get him out of Russia reportedly came in late 2016, which this Kremlin source rejected. That led to concerns that he was actually acting as a double agent, because why wouldn't he not want to be pulled out of Russia if the CIA was asking him to leave, fearing he was in danger? So that led to concerns that he was acting as a double agent, or that his intelligence wasn't reliable. After that is when we started seeing media leaks pointing to his existence, first in late 2016, and then in June 2017, when the Washington Post reported that the CIA had a mole inside the Kremlin, and that's why the Obama administration was so confident about its assessments that Vladimir Putin was trying to elect Donald Trump. Around then is exactly when this man, Oleg Smolenkov, that's when he actually leaves Russia. He goes to Montenegro on vacation, and then he disappears, and he turns up living under his own name in Washington, D.C. in a luxury home. So, which raises questions in itself about how valuable and how high level he actually was.
Right, exactly. And I think the other interesting thing was that the New York Times almost acted as a debunker here.
Hmm.
Uh, I found it interesting that Kyle Griffin, who's always a source, he's a producer, I guess, on MSNBC, and he always has sort of hot takes and breaking news. You know, they portrayed it as the New York Times confirming the CNN's report, when really the New York Times was skeptical, particularly about this was all Trump's fault. Trump is the one who exposed this Kremlin source.
Yeah, I mean, it was so, even without knowing all the details, it's so transparently stupid to give this as the reason when, as I said before, the intelligence that Trump supposedly revealed to Russian visitors in the Oval Office was not sensitive at all. So just the explanation seemed sketchy on its face. And the fact is, look, for all this concern about this Kremlin source's identity, it's leaks from intelligence officials that have made him public. As I mentioned earlier, we first heard the real, a real concrete reporting of the fact that the CIA had this Kremlin mole in June 2017. And then after that, we started hearing all these stories about, the CIA being concerned that Trump and then Attorney General William Barr are going to compromise sensitive sources because of Barr's investigation into the origins of the Russia probe. So it seems like such a transparent attempt to, one, try to, spin the narrative in favor of the CIA back when it first gets revealed, because we learn in June 2017 that this Kremlin mole personally heard Vladimir Putin order a influence campaign to elect Trump. And then later on, after Russiagate collapses and there's now an investigation into the investigation, now looks like there's this attempt to get out ahead of the results findings, because we know that Barr is looking into the use of this source, and everything we know about this source, Oleg Smolenkov, so far is not very impressive. I mean, just the fact that he's living under his own name in Washington, D.C., says right there that he's not that sensitive a source, and that it looks like maybe he fell out of even favor with the CIA. Perhaps they determined that he wasn't reliable. I mean, that's speculation, but it's hard to see a plausible scenario where this high-level Russian guy gives up all this valuable intelligence and confirmed intelligence, and then he ends up living under his own name in
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. It just doesn't make sense. And everything we know about him, he actually was a mid-level Kremlin official. He was an advisor to the former Russian ambassador to the U.S. He followed him back to Russia. This former ambassador does end up becoming a top aide to, our top advisor to Vladimir Putin. But the idea that he'd be privy to hearing Putin order a secret influence campaign, it just doesn't wash. And also, what's interesting is that, just look at what we know about the timeline. So in late July, John Brennan supposedly gets this tip from this Kremlin mole that Vladimir Putin has ordered this influence campaign to elect Donald Trump. Well, look at the timing. This comes just as the FBI has opened an investigation into Trump-Russia collusion. If the mole had picked up Vladimir Putin ordering this influence campaign to elect Trump, why does it come in only then and not come in months earlier, when Putin would have had to have actually made the orders? Because, it's months earlier that the Democratic Party emails are actually stolen. And we're supposed to believe that they were stolen by Russia. So if they're stolen by Russia, presumably someone would have had to have make that order, and that would be Vladimir Putin for the purposes of his influence campaign. So why is the mole only picking up that order just as the FBI's investigation is opening, and not months earlier, before the supposed operation would have had to have begun, because the emails were stolen in something like April of 2016. So the timeline doesn't make sense. And what does make sense to me is that John Brennan, for his own reasons, basically, gave us another Iraq WMD scam here. We know already from reporting that John Brennan kind of took over the intelligence process on this in the summer of 2016, which is very strange. I mean, if you're, usually
Yeah.
you have analysts, you have the Russia House at the CIA, which is the CIA wing, which handles Russia matters. But by all accounts, Brennan isolated them. He poured over, if you read the book The Apprentice by Greg Miller, you'll see that there are these scenes of John Brennan staying up late at night in his office with the glow of his computer screen visible through the window, pouring over all this intelligence that for some reason no one else was as alarmed by as he was. And you see that there's even references to Brennan ordering up the raw, underlying, unprocessed material, which basically means stuff the CIA has gotten, but which hasn't been properly vetted because there are multiple layers of analysis and scrutiny. So John Brennan bypasses all of that, puts this in a secret envelope, deems all this to be too sensitive to include in the presidential daily brief, and goes right around even putting it in the PDB and delivers it personally to Obama and a couple of other aides, and says, we have a Kremlin mole. It says Putin's has ordered his campaign to elect Trump. We have to act, And so, the explanation is that Brennan thinks all this is too sensitive to include in the PDB because it might leak out. I think the real reason is he didn't want to subject it to proper scrutiny, just as he didn't want to subject it to proper scrutiny when he was putting it together at the CIA and went around some of his colleagues. And that extends further to when Brennan then is tasked with putting out the intelligence community assessment that came out in January 2017. Brennan also bypassed scrutiny there because he controlled the process. He had a couple of handpicked agents write it, merely in coordination with the NSA and FBI, but they didn't even write it. And he got this report in less than a month, which is like an unprecedented timeline to produce a report of this nature, of this sensitivity, which of course accuses Putin of this influence campaign, so it's just all of it sounds like Iraq, and all of it sounds like John Brennan was the point person here.
Yeah, and the context and the timeline and bringing things back in, understanding what other things were happening at the time is always really important in the Russiagate, but particularly in this one because at the end of July there and in August. We also know from other stories that Brennan was really pushing hard. He's briefing Congress. He's pressuring Harry Reid to pressure Jim Comey to open up an FBI investigation. And he's really pushing to try to advance this narrative. And he doesn't seem to have enough material for them to do it. They don't seem to be going along with it. So then he pulls out this, this super secret Kremlin spy. And he also bypasses all of the experts who would normally go over this material before it ever gets to Obama. And, we hear about the secret white envelope. It's just pretty weird. But going back to that night again, for the night that I say that night, but it was I guess like a 24-hour period when this is all going on. The Maté show, which I had not looked at until today, she brings Ken Dilanian. And of course, I think most people listening to this are going to know Ken Dilanian is, the CIA's man in the media, and he'll pretty much do anything for them. But she brings Ken Dilanian on, and they say something really weird. Let me just play this clip. It's like a minute. Just set it up real quick, Aaron, because I thought it was stunning what they said.
That's right. And when I asked both U.S. government officials and former officials who worked on these problems about that, what they say is, look, it's probably not a secret to the Russians that this person is here. When he left Russia, it became clear to them that he had been working for the U.S. But what they don't want and what they think happened in Skripal is to taunt Putin with the idea that here's this turncoat, here's this former Russian official who spied for the CIA living in the United States. So they sort of feel there's a measure of safety. They don't expect the Russians to come over and assassinate him until, unfortunately, he's discovered by the media and the world, and then we all start writing about him, and that essentially pokes the bear. This is what my sources are telling me. That's why they're now more worried about his safety than they were 48 hours ago, Rachel.
And that reporting, obviously, you're able to describe, him living in Virginia, him living under his real name, and all these other details. But essentially, that poking the bear kind of started with CNN and NBC reporting out his existence, the exfiltration and all of these things. Essentially, the idea is that as the media was going to start to figure him out and this is going to start to become a story, things were going to get increasingly dangerous for him.
That's right. And I fear that even though we are withholding details and acceding to the wishes of U.S. officials who say passionately that they believe his life could be at risk, it isn't that hard to find him, and others are going to work to do that. Right. And in the climate that we live in, eventually it will come out. But now there's now time for the U.S. government to move him and his family to a different location.
So they're basically saying that this guy really wasn't in much danger until the media started to report, specifics about him. But I think NBC is the one who did report specifics about him, right?
Yeah, they reported, that they went to his door and they reported, the area where he lived, and yeah, and just by going to his door, they're drawing attention to him. And basically, what they're saying there is, what we are doing right now is the thing that is endangering
Yes.
him, but they're
Yeah.
not, but they're just saying it, and they know it, but they're not acknowledging the import of that. But the fact is, look, I'd be really surprised if the Russian government did not know that he was living in DC and did not know exactly where he was. I get the sense that they don't care, because they find this whole Russiagate thing laughable. They know he didn't give anything up. If they had, you'd think maybe they would have, when they let him travel, even like when he disappears, it's like, they give this impression that he was exfiltrated from Russia by the CIA. No, what happened was he traveled to Montenegro on vacation, and they let him go. They could have stopped him, because by that point he was already fired from working in the Kremlin. They could have stopped him, but they didn't. And I get the sense that they maybe even wanted him to go to the U.S. They were fine to watch the U.S. government play itself as, thinking they had this high-level Kremlin mole when really they didn't. And, before I forget, I wanted to mention about Brennan, because it's important what you were saying about his timeline, what he was doing in the summer of 2016. He also had this meeting with the former head of the GCHQ, Robert Hannigan, according to Jane Mayer of the New
Right.
Yorker. Robert Hannigan, I'll read the quote. I have it here. In the summer of 2016, Robert Hannigan, then the head of the UK's intelligence service, the GCHQ, had recently went to Washington and briefed the CIA's director, John Brennan, on a stream of illicit communications between Trump's team and Moscow that had been intercepted. Okay, so that claim about intercepted communications is, we've heard that before, and that's just false. The New York Times did something similar, which Jim Comey even said was not true. But the fact that Hannigan of the GCHQ goes to Washington and briefs John Brennan, well, it's not hard to guess what they were talking about. It most likely was the Steele dossier, and Hannigan probably was giving Brennan actually not anything about communications between Trump and Moscow, but stuff that Steele had said about communications between Trump and Moscow. So look, John Brennan's fingerprints are everywhere here. The scam is right in front of our faces. The problem is, all the leaks so far have pretty much gone one way. They've gone in the way of trying to portray this narrative of Trump and Russia secretly colluding. And now we're starting to see that fall apart. But, without like a source willing to, speak out against this, it's still difficult to prove concretely. Hopefully, with the review right now underway by Attorney General William Barr and John Durham, we'll get some of the facts. But then, you have to ask the obvious question. If you're John Brennan, I mean, accepting the premise that John Brennan, cooked all this, but if you're John Brennan and it's after the election in November 2016, you have a couple of months left in office, you're probably going to do what you can to cover your bases. And, I think it's plausible to speculate if maybe some evidence was destroyed. I mean, I guess somebody who's more familiar with the CIA could, speak to how plausible that would be to cook the books and to cover your tracks. But I just, it's so sketchy. But what is obvious to me is that John Brennan and whoever he was working with engaged in some really shady behavior.
Yeah, exactly. And you did an interview with John Kiriakou and Brian Becker that you probably remember the details of that. I have a clip here if you want me to play it. But, Kiriakou goes into some more details about how what he emphasizes. I was really glad that he emphasized the fact that Brennan did an end run around what they call the Russia House, the people who would normally vet. So supposedly before any information ends up in the president's daily brief or, in it through any other way that he gets intelligence, it's seriously vetted. And especially after the run up to the Iraq War, the cooking of the WMD story and all of that, it's even more vetted now, supposedly. So the fact that he did this end run around all the Russia experts, is really telling, in my view. And then not only did he do that, but he created this, you know, task force. I think I don't even remember what the thing was called, but he had,
It's a fusion cell.
yeah.
Yeah.
And he has that, in the CIA, he's got full control over it. He's got like Strzok as part of it, and I don't even know who else is part of it. But he takes this whole thing totally under his control and isolated from all of the other experts, which is, it was probably done under the national security and super secret and high risk and all that. But, it's extremely suspicious. And let me go back to the Delanian interview with Maddow. Um, first of all, they're saying, well, he's not in any danger until what we just did. But there was another interesting thing there, too. Delanian admits that he's the one who went up to the Russian agent's house. And then he tells this story about how this car came rushing down the street. But he says it took them 5 minutes to even get there after he rang the doorbell. And I'm thinking, well, if he was trying to portray this as high level security, it's really not, right? Because he could have killed him by then.
Yeah, he could have. And again, it speaks to the question of just how high level and how valuable this guy was. And so, by the way, Ken Delanian, he's not showing up on a day, on a normal day. He's showing up after this story has broken public. So you think at least on that day that security would be a little better, but it's not. And again, we can only draw inferences. It's hard to make any firm conclusions in the absence of concrete source, a whistleblower speaking out saying this is actually what happened. But there's all the pieces just point to this whole thing being a scam. Early on, I was actually pretty open to the possibility that the Russian government stole the Democratic Party emails. Now, of course, even if they had, the significance of that was blown like exponentially out of proportion. This idea that this was like an attack on the U.S. and all this silliness. But the more we learn about it, the more we see just disingenuous language on the part of Mueller, on the part of anonymous intelligence officials in terms of how they frame things, a timeline that doesn't make sense when it comes to how WikiLeaks obtained from Russian intelligence and all these sketchy things that we don't need to get into now. But it's looking just the more we do learn in small drips, the more we just see that this thing just does not add up. And we're looking at one of the biggest intelligence scams in U.S. history. I mean, right up there with the Iraq War.
Yeah, I just remembered what the point I was going to make about the Ritter article. The other interesting thing he brings up is that the two pieces of intelligence that Brennan was working with to try to advance this to an investigation that gets announced publicly are the Steele dossier, the whatever SIGINT that they got from maybe it was Estonia, somewhere in Eastern Europe, right? So they had these two reports, and neither of them were particularly credible. Mm-hmm. And so he wasn't really getting where he wanted to go with these two reports. Mm-hmm. And so he brought in the Smolenkov report, and he added that to it and used that to sort of corroborate, to boost the credibility of the other ones, or maybe to override the lack of credibility of the other two reports, so that the three of those things as a package would advance this in the direction where he was trying to go, and would sort of convince everyone of his credibility. And supposedly he was successful in that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And by the way, if Smolenkov was so high level, then how come he couldn't predict to the Obama administration some of the most critical intelligence failures involving Russia? So, for example, it took the Obama administration, it caught them totally off guard when Putin intervened in Syria. It also caught the Obama administration totally off guard when Putin sent forces into Ukraine and annexed Crimea. So if Smolenkov is so high level and so up there and able to capture Putin's specific orders, then how does he keep missing all these key events that the U.S. wants to know about? So it's just it just does, it's so laughable on its face. And the hope is that the Barr investigation or something, or some whistleblower or something, more leaks will help us learn what actually happened.
Right, exactly. So before we wrap up, I had sent you a clip from the Skullduggery podcast, which I thought you would enjoy. It is Michael Isikoff and Daniel Klaban are the co-hosts of it. They're from Yahoo News, and they bring on Susan Glasser, who has been very, very focused on the Trump administration. As far as I know, she was all in on Russiagate, and they start talking about the political fallout from this.
You're a former Moscow correspondent, and we had a kerfuffle this week about a story first reported by CNN and then reported somewhat differently by others, that the CIA had to exfiltrate a top spy who was instrumental in some of the intelligence about Russian interference in the presidential election. As originally reported by CNN, it was because of concerns that Trump might actually leak the name in some way to his friends in Moscow. Subsequent reporting by the New York Times and others say, no, that wasn't the case, that in fact they were worried about trying to bring him out as early as 2016 under Obama. Your take on this story?
We've so politicized everything having to do with intelligence, and especially with Russia and intelligence in this Trump context, that, you know, of course, it's hard for you or me or anybody to really evaluate this competing claims and counterclaims. And, you know, Trump has been at war with the basic notion of, you know, a single truth when it comes to intelligence, because he's so concerned to distance himself and to illegitimize the foundations of the very serious questions that were raised about him and why Russia was so supportive of him in the 2016 election. So I think this story has to be seen in the context of that. You know,
I agree with you, but I got to say that if you're CNN and you're going to put Trump in the middle of this story, just to your point, you better be pretty damn sure you've got it right.
That's
because
right.
All you do otherwise
is undermine.
Undermine all of us. And feed the perception
Yes.
that we are a fake media, and that's really dangerous.
And if you've been watching Fox News in the last couple of days, they've been playing this up to the fare thee well. Another case of fake news by CNN, injecting, putting it on Trump when clearly there would have been legitimate reasons to be concerned about this guy, completely independent of Donald Trump. Now, the Russians have since put out a name. I guess this is a guy who had been an aide to the then Russian ambassador in Washington. They're suggesting he was a nobody, a coffee boy, to coin a phrase.
Yes, Sergei Lavrov was, the foreign minister was laughing publicly about this.
What do you
but
make
of course,
of the
Russian
Russians?
denials obviously are not very much to be taken seriously. I do take much more seriously the reporting of our colleagues in the Times and elsewhere, suggesting there's a different version of this story. Again, it's the assault on the notion of, one agreed upon set of facts. That is what we're coming out of this very, very unfortunate moment in American political history with. And I just think that's so damaging. I also think that it is a reminder of how quickly, like a stone, the Russia story has sunk into oblivion. I mean, even by people who are so critical of Trump. And as we speak, they are up on Capitol Hill, agreeing upon terms that will guide whatever they're calling it, an impeachment inquiry, an impeachment investigation. But, what really leaps out, is that, again, to me, Democrats have been so singularly unsuccessful at finding a coherent and powerful way of voicing and registering their concern about what's happening with Trump in the country. It strikes me that Democrats have been fixated on the impeachment of Bill Clinton Bill Clinton, and shaping their political analysis of what to do about Donald Trump to the expense of any other historical analogy in a way that almost certainly is greatly to their detriment. Bill Clinton, let's be clear, was like the poorest, president we'd had in office in many years. We're talking about a president who, seems to be enriching himself in the course of the presidency.
Although Clinton did pretty well after he left office.
But the point is that we're obsessed with fighting the last war. Yes. And I think that has really been intellectually lazy on the part of Trump's critics and probably to the detriment of their political success.
I thought you would like the part where they said the Russiagate stone is dropped like a rock.
Yeah, but notice how they're still so attached to it. They still think it's the biggest scandal, and they can't believe that Democrats are bungling the response to it, and they still take for granted that the underlying assumption that Russia intervened to elect Trump is true. And when you believe in this, and you're so attached to that belief, it's difficult to properly gauge the implications of all this countervailing evidence we keep getting that undermines it. And that's a case study of it there. And it's funny to hear them frustrated with CNN, thinking that CNN is undermining their own cause. Well, their own cause undermines itself. I mean, if you're pushing the Russiagate narrative, no matter what, whether you're CNN with this running this story or any other story, you're going to look silly, because just the more information comes out, the more we learn how baseless this whole thing is.
Yeah.
And so, I think we can expect very many more moments like this of pundits lamenting the frustrating development of more and more information coming out, undermining their narrative.
Yeah, I agree. The one last bit that I thought was interesting that she brought up, and Isikoff didn't seem to understand what she was saying, but she keeps saying that the Democrats are fighting the last war and they're singularly focused on Bill Clinton's impeachment. I found that to be particularly interesting because for almost since the beginning, but certainly after the election, to me, I mean, I thought the Clintons' hand, Brennan is certainly at the center of it, but I think the Clintons' hand was shown throughout the whole thing in ways that they were seeking revenge, and not just revenge for losing this election, but for everything that they've been through since the 90s. And I thought that there were signs of that all through, but that's a whole nother conversation. I need to let you go. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Just, I hope we get to the bottom of this scam. It's right in front of our faces, but yet, unlike the Iraq War, it's actually taken longer to totally collapse, because there's still, pundits on TV going on and saying stuff like this. We just heard, like, with a straight face. And, hopefully the reviews by Attorney General Barr will uncover something. But, it would be great if there was a minimal concern with oversight of the intelligence community, there'd be actual hearings in, bipartisan hearings like we had with the Church Committee in the 70s about this, because, again, this is not a partisan issue, no matter where you stand on the political spectrum, and this is an obvious point. It's strange to even have to make it, but obviously, I'm not a fan of President Trump. I'd love to see him defeated in 2020, but whether or not intelligence officials should have the authority to try to sabotage his campaign and launch a phony investigation based on nothing and have that engulf the country for 2 years. I mean, we just don't grant intelligence officials that right. And it's really important to hold them to account. And that should be, I think, transparently obvious to everybody, no matter what party you are. But unfortunately, it's Democrats that have sort of made Russiagate synonymous with the resistance, that to question that is deemed somehow to be supportive of President Trump, when really, it's actually just supportive of minimal standards of democracy. And, even from the point of view of self-interest, unless there's some accountability here, it's quite possible that intelligence officials could use this kind of power that they've abused in the future on progressive candidates.
Yeah,
like, what
exactly.
What if a future candidate starts questioning, seriously questioning the U.S. alliance with Israel, or U.S., endless wars around the world? I mean, could they then launch an investigation of them for having, illicit ties that don't actually exist? So it's just important to have accountability here. And that won't be anything new to your audience, but it's interesting how that hasn't reached a wider liberal consciousness.
Yeah, I agree. It's a top priority, and just like the too big to fail banks, it's guaranteed to happen again and worse if
Yep.
it's not addressed. So, okay, Aaron, tell everybody where to find your work and your new show, which is fantastic, by the way. And I'm pretty sure everybody already knows you, but just how to support you and where to find you.
Well, the show that I host for the Gray Zone is at pushbackshow.com. It's called Pushback. And I'm also on Twitter at Aaron J. Maté. And that's about it.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Joanne.
Thank you for listening. A special thanks to Aaron Maté. Follow Aaron on Twitter at Aaron J. Maté. Find his show, Pushback with Aaron Maté, at pushbackshow.com. Find his writing at The Nation, and support him on Patreon at patreon.com/Aaron Maté. The Around the Empire podcast is independent media. Please pitch in if you can at patreon.com/Around the Empire or at paypal.me/Around the Empire pod. There are many ways to listen to this show. Find it on any mobile podcast app, or on the website aroundtheempire.com, or on Patreon, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, or on YouTube, youtube.com/aroundtheempire. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, send me some feedback in the comments or via email at admin@aroundtheempire.com. Follow the show on Twitter at aroundtheempire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.